Shares of Nutrien are up today. Look, they're up almost 4% at this point. The Canadian fertilizer beat analyst expectations in its third quarter profit. Fertilizer company saying it would initiate a review of strategic alternatives for its phosphate business. Let's get more on this from Seth Goldstein. He's an equity strategist with Morningstar Research Services. Seth, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
What's driving the results for Nutrien?
Well, when we look at Nutrien, the two biggest drivers of its profits are its potash business and nitrogen. And here we saw higher prices. Potash prices were up about 30% year over year in the quarter. Nitrogen prices were up about 20% year over year during the quarter. And these contributed to meaningfully higher profit growth for Nutrien. And then we see the retail business, which is Nutrien's other largest business. And we see the company's cost reduction program finally starting to show profit growth. And so even with a little bit weaker results in key products like fertilizer and seed and crop protection, we were still seeing profit growth in the retail business due to greater overhead cost reductions. And so you put this all together, and Q3 was a strong quarter for Nutrien.
Now you mentioned for the retail that the cost reductions were a big factor. What about the other two sectors? What helped them this time?
Well, it was pretty much higher prices. You know, as a commodity producer and a low-cost commodity producer, Nutrien has a pretty fixed cost base for its potash operation, a pretty fixed cost base for nitrogen. All of that fluctuates a little bit with U.S. and Canadian natural gas price movements, but generally price movements for both of these commodities is going to be the largest profit driver in any given quarter. And so with prices higher, 30% up for potash, 20% up year over year in nitrogen, that's going to be a big profit driver. And so that was really the key drivers behind Nutrien's strong quarter.
Okay, and now phosphate, a different story. What's going on with that?
So phosphate's always been a very small business for Nutrien ever since the company was created with the merger of Potash Corp and Agrium last decade. But when you look at phosphate, it really has not been a big driver of profits for Nutrien. And so they're putting the business up for a strategic review. We think this likely means they're going to explore selling the business, a full divestiture. That's certainly one of the outcomes if they can get a good price for the business, which we think makes sense because right now we think Nutrien is focusing on divesting non-core assets like we've seen them do and paring down their South American operations. And we think it makes sense to exit phosphate, use the funds to either repurchase shares, as we think the stock's currently undervalued, or invest more into the low-cost potash and nitrogen operations where we think they can generate a better return on invested capital. So we think this is a good process, and we think management is making a strategically sound move here.
And is there interest for it, do you think?
I think there will be interest. You know, you look at phosphate and the U.S. government's considering reclassifying it as a strategic mineral. And we've seen what minerals are classified as of having strategic importance to the U.S. government. Lately, that's come with government support for junior miners. So I think there would be a lot of companies, some strategic partners, perhaps some financial investors like a private equity firm looking at this business and wanting to take a look at it to potentially buy it. So I think Nutrien will get strong interest if they decide to put the business up for sale.
And moving forward, looking at the next year, how is it shaping up? We've got some issues with China, the export restrictions, and weaker affordability for phosphate fertilizers hitting demand. Where do you see it going and everything else going over the next year?
Yeah, so for phosphate, we expect prices will stay fairly high over the next year just due to China's continued export restrictions, as China is really taking more phosphate that it produces and using it internally to meet lithium battery demands for its lithium iron phosphate batteries. And so that leaves less phosphate to export to the global market, which has really led to phosphate prices being well above what we view as the marginal cost of production over the past several years. So we expect phosphate prices will remain high. But if you look at the rest of Nutrien's operations, we expect continued progress in retail and good results. We think potash prices will stay in the mid $300 range. We think that reflects the marginal cost of production, and we expect demand growth at those levels as more farmers will apply it to their fields, and that should largely offset any new supply growth coming online. And then with nitrogen, we expect a similar story. We expect more price stabilization around current levels today. And so for Nutrien, I think 2026 is shaping up to be another strong year of profits, unless we see some sort of supplier demand disruption on the fertilizer side.
Okay, Seth, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Seth Goldstein is equity strategist at Morningstar Research Services.